need to start with a problem statement. So the problem statement is AI for everyone, breaking down silos for maximum innovation. Here we will have representatives from 3 industries to talk about this topic. All 3 industries have been directly shaped by COVID-19, although I can't imagine any industry that is not shaped by COVID-19 at this moment. So let me introduce them. We have Sutowo Wong, Director for Analytics and Information Management, Ministry of Health in Singapore. He represents the healthcare industry and that continues to face tremendous pressure. We have Bireshwar Dasgupta, Head of Analytics, Propositions and Digital Initiatives at Commercial Banking at Standard Chartered Bank. He represents the banking industry that is becoming a digital play these days. And lastly, we have Abhinav Singhal, Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at APAC at thyssenkrupp. He comes from the manufacturing side, where sensors and predictive maintenance is now becoming mainstays, not just differentiators anymore. Welcome, guys. Thank you for joining. I think it's going to be a difficult, always the difficult session to be the last one, but I'm actually looking forward to this one because we're going to have a good discussion. And there were some good questions that is coming through.
Thanks, Winston.
So maybe we can start off, make it easy. And I'd like to ask everyone online that if you have any questions, please use the Q&A. This is our last session. So anything on AI, please go ahead and do ask. I will moderate those questions though. Go ahead. First of all, I'd like to talk about how can you explain AI in how it is shaping your industry. Maybe I can start with the healthcare industry, Sutowo.
Hi, thanks, Winston.
No problem.
There are actually many AI applications in healthcare. One such area is actually what we call Diagnostic. We have a national healthcare AI use case by the name of Selena Plus. It doesn't stand for the person who came out of the model, but rather Selena stands for Singapore Eye Lesion Analyzer Plus. Plus because it is a second iteration of the first version that actually was implemented. It is a deep learning system that is jointly developed by our Singapore National Eye Centre, SNEC, and the National University of Singapore, NUS, that scans retinal images for signs of 3 different diabetic eye diseases. For information for everyone here, diabetic retinopathy is a major consequence, which is a major consequence of diabetes. It's a leading cause of vision loss in working age adult worldwide. So currently the analysis is actually done by trained readers who are in SNEC's Ocular Reading Center. And there's also another center at Tan Tock Seng Hospital for those people who are familiar with the public healthcare in Singapore. The work is very tedious, very tiring, time consuming. They receive more than 4,000 images a day, all of which needs to be processed by 8 to 10 staff who will grade the eye condition from the images. And these graders actually sit in a darkened room where they have to then stare at the retinal images on the screen to look for abnormalities. They're typically not allowed to work for more than half a day, as it is too strenuous for the eye. And the images currently go through 3 levels of check. There's the primary grader that looks at the image, and those with abnormality are, along with 10% of normal images, are then sent to a secondary grader. And if the primary and secondary grader disagree in the analysis of the image, you'll be sent to an ophthalmologist who's a specialist. And Selena Plus really is to replace the role of the primary grader so that the patient with normal result can receive the report much more quickly than before. In fact, we have done we have timed the difference between Selena Plus and the manual process. Selena Plus will take only 3 minutes, whereas a manual process will take actually 1 hour. So this is an example of how AI is driving a lot of the work in healthcare, and this is just one example of it. Okay.
Will it be boosted up to actually take over the second grader itself as well?
Because we will need to still look at assessing or comparing against the normal ones, while the AI algorithm can actually have a probabilistically identify whether or not the image is abnormal. I think it's still better for someone, a human grader, to actually go through that again to ensure that it's okay. Okay. That because there's a lot of patient safety issue involved here, so we want to make sure that this is actually done in the safest possible manner. Yeah, but you're right. Actually, in many industries where there's less of a safety concern. I think a lot of these things we can push the envelope a lot more.
Yeah, I'm sure in healthcare you have to always have the balance, and also it depends on the demographics and the different generations how comfortable they are in actually allowing AI to take over some parts of the healthcare. Maybe I move to Bireshwar. In banking, I know that's lots of examples, but could you give me an overview of, especially after COVID, how is AI being applied? It could be at the back end.
Absolutely. Thanks, Winston.
Yeah.
In fact, as a highly regulated and a very people, paper, and process heavy industry, financial services is one sector which is very well placed to benefit from the scale deployment of AI capabilities. And actually, it's one of the sectors which I would call is the early adopter. In fact, recently the World Economic Forum published a report which reported that about 64% of financial institutions globally expect to become mass adopters of AI within the next 2 years. While there are several different areas in which we as a sector are leveraging AI, the 2 or 3 most common and thematic ones are as follows. First and foremost is really around the automation and RPA initiatives using NLP and OCR, because there is a tremendous amount of high volume, manual, rules-based middle and back office tasks. And we're seeing a lot of efficiencies come through there. As you can imagine, given the kind of scrutiny that things have to go through, there is somebody who's making the document, somebody who's checking the document, somebody who's approving the document. And a lot of that can be digitized and automated. And not only are we benefiting from the efficiencies, but even our clients are experiencing faster service and faster decisions on their requests. The other area where I'm hoping everybody on this call is starting to see their banks treat them a lot better with much more better and personalized services is really around the more contextual offering that we are now able to do. We are able to study your past behaviors, your demographic trends to come up with offers that make more sense for you. And depending on privacy and different things which are enabled, there are several different ways in which really targeted offers can be, which are more relevant for you, to be made available to you. So that you're not getting inundated with everybody getting a home loan offer when they don't really need one, right? And an extreme example of that would be, you're in a mall, your location services is on. We know which credit card you have, and we're able to tell you, based on your preferences in these stores using this credit card, you could get this discount. And so you're not wandering around store to store figuring out where. If you have a need, it kind of directs you there. But the single biggest use in our area really is around the augmented decision-making and using machine learning algorithms, where we are using not just the structured data that we have available with us, but a lot of the unstructured data as well to identify client needs. And more importantly, to supplement the underwriting decisions which we take. Any of you, if you've ever applied for a home loan or a credit card, or if you have any business owners on this call who have applied for loans from the banks, we would always ask you for your financial statements, your income statements for the last 12 months and things like that. And again, in the absence of anything else, a backward-looking analysis of your past performance to predict your future credibility was one way of looking at it. But increasingly, we're at a state where we are able to replace the traditional sources with a lot more non-traditional and a lot more real-time, a lot more transaction-specific, end-use specific use cases. And what's really interesting is this is not restricted just in the individual or the retail banking space. We are seeing examples at scale of this getting deployed, even in the corporate banking space, where we're evaluating corporate risk using slightly non-traditional data. What's interesting is this is not unique to just old school financial institutions. It's partly reactive as well. A lot of the fintechs are now operating in this exact value chain and identifying very, very specific examples where they're using data to take away some of the business from us. In fact, a recent survey indicated that almost 61% of business owners now get financing from non-traditional, non-banking sources. The last piece really is, the last context from a banking perspective is the examples that I mentioned are examples where we have reacted and we have seen the opportunity and are trying to digitize our processes. But a lot of this is also reactionary. The world is evolving and banking needs to find its place in this evolving world, right? To give you an example, you have let's take a car insurance. You have a standard insurance premium model. How does that change in the era of self-driving cars? How does actuarial services and the premiums that we offer on health insurance adjust itself in an era where in 1 or 2 years, while we're doing this video recording, thanks to the work that Sutowo and team are doing, somebody's actually looking at the retina and doing a health assessment real time. And how do we build that pricing model in? So it's both. It's what we are doing. It's also how we have to react to the evolving world.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I might be diabetic, right? So at this rate. And Bireshwar, just a quick one. You mentioned about different data sources, but how do you keep the data noise to a level where you can actually look at the actual trends and not being biased?
Okay, you've gone into the heart of a very sensitive and a very hotly and actively debated topic these days. Now, I think when we talk about noise, there are two things. There is, of course, the data quality piece. And I think we heard from the previous conversations around the importance of data quality. And then I think the other lens of that is then, the bias that might creep into a black box model, right? So it's both. I think on data quality, especially on the internal pieces, I think there is no shortcut around it. It's a lot of hard work, but the foundational investment in ensuring accuracy is absolutely critical. You don't get a lot of chances in terms of getting your models out there. If you feed them incorrect information, if the outcomes are not accurate, it just wouldn't land. But I think the bias piece is more important because, as you can imagine, in the scale of things that I described, there are things where if bias creeps in, it doesn't have such a bad effect. So in case we give a wrong offer to you, Winston, or to Abhinav, the worst thing that happens from that based on incorrect data is we make an offer to Abhinav, which he does not like, or to Sutowo, where he doesn't need a home loan, which is not so bad. But if bias starts creeping in on the basis of age, race, ethnicity, other aspects in more important and foundational things like credit decisions of who gets a loan, who doesn't get a loan, that's where things get tricky. I don't think there's a unified answer. I think the answer is in multiple levels. One is, anytime you're building a model, you have to be very conscious of the risk of that happening and trying to gate against that. So just being aware of that risk is very important. It's something that we keep inculcating within our teams. But we're also trying to do a few other things, especially in the more sensitive areas. We're trying to ensure that we do augment, it's not replacing human decision entirely, it's augmenting human decision. So you still will have a pair of eyes looking over the data to, take us additional pair of eyes. Second thing is, again, we're testing these things in different areas where can we starve the models of the attributes that could lead to some of the biases if you just take those out from the model input feed itself. And the last piece is really around also doing a bit of back testing. If you're aware that this risk exists, you test your, you test the algorithms on historic data, and you see whether you test it for exactly the kind of attributes you want to protect against. Is it causing some unconscious higher reject rates on certain categories, and see if you can, adjust for that. I think the last thing, I don't want to go on and on, but I think the last thing I want to mention is while the risk of bias is an important consideration, I think, and it's a very valid point, I think we must realize also on a lighter note that AI is replacing human decision in large moment. And that in itself is a black box. Okay, there are certain rules, but there's a lot of bias even in human decision making when it comes to loans and all of that. So it's a mix of all of these pieces.
They used to say that we are being too hard on AI models, but not too hard on the humans who actually created them. Abhinav, in your industry, especially IoTs and sensor data, and especially where you're pushing predictive maintenance, which is a big push, could you let me know how AI is shaping?
Sure. I'm happy to give you an overview of how AI is shaping manufacturing. So unlike banking, as we heard from Bireshwar, I would say manufacturing is a comparatively slower adoption of AI. And maybe if I have to share top 2-3 reasons behind that, I think the first one is because manufacturing as a setup is focused on operational excellence, Six Sigma quality control. So when it comes to adopting new technologies, you don't want to experiment in a manufacturing plant and risk the batch size or the quality of the product. By playing with new technologies. So I would say it's relatively looks for mature solutions and not nascent solutions. I think the second element is the sheer availability of data in a manufacturing plant. Because unlike banking or retail, where it is collecting data is about collecting applications and then having a unified data source or a data lake to play with, in manufacturing, it means putting sensors on physical machines and components, connecting the legacy IT, OT systems in sites which have maybe poor Wi-Fi connectivity or a poor connectivity of, let's say, fiber broadband. So just collecting the sheer data in a manufacturing plant is an effort and investment upfront. And third, of course, is working with operators and in helping them get the right mindset and how do you utilize the data. And this is not about taking jobs versus trying to enable you getting better in what you're doing. So I think because of these structural reasons, manufacturing is a bit slow in terms of adoption if I look at different sectors. Having said that, now in terms of opportunities, so there was a study by Accenture looking at a chemical plant, and they estimated a chemical plant generates typically 500 terabytes of data in a year across the value chain. So all the way from product development, inbound logistics, the data generated by machines on a daily basis across pressure, temperature, flow rate on a microsecond level, or outbound logistics, inventory, warehousing, distribution, customer transactions. If you are able to capture all those data points and store them, you're looking at 500 terabytes of data to play with. And that gives you a scale of the opportunity which exists, because that means you can optimize all these data sets in different processes, or you can even combine them and optimize it from product development all the way to sales in a manufacturing context. And that's where we are seeing now more and more applications coming up. So if I look at these 3-4 parts of the value chain at the logistics front, the hottest use case is on route and network optimization. How do I use artificial intelligence to find the most efficient route for transportation and save cost on that? Or in a warehouse, it is about automating the pick and packing process in a warehouse using robotics to do that in a more safe and efficient manner. When it comes to production or in a manufacturing setup, it is about energy efficiency. How do I use AI to better manage my energy consumption of a machine? How do I better predict the quality and use the input variability as an optimizing factor based on the output quality I want in a chemical plant, for example? How do I do condition monitoring and predictive maintenance? This is again a very popular use case because it has a very direct linkage to the business case behind it. You save time on predictive maintenance, you have value delivered on EBIT, and you can justify the investment, right? And we are seeing use cases around that. And finally, when it comes to, I would say, outbound distribution and customer interaction, it is about pricing. How can, moving away from, let's say, a very fixed pricing menu for our customers, we can personalize the pricing we have based on, let's say, the supply demand characteristics, the input price of the raw material, do a better demand sensing. Let's say in a cement setup, I don't know who is consuming my end cement bag, but if I can connect the value chain and the data sets across inventories, across the whole distribution network, I can have a much better demand sensing, better plan my production and optimize the operations. So we are seeing now increasing a lot of these use cases being adopted, but there is still a way to go, I would say, in manufacturing because of the sheer complexity of connecting the machines and generating these data sets.
Okay, that's a good point. Well, one of the issues I wanted to discuss with you is optimizing, which you mentioned. And manufacturing is all about optimization, lean processes. Now, when there was a shift between pre-COVID to post-COVID, the demand, the market assumptions changed, the trends changed, the trigger points changed, and the model that was trained pre-COVID might not have worked with post-COVID. Where do you come in? Is there a human intervention, or do you see a case where machines actually monitoring machines?
Sure. No, I think that's a very fair question. As Bireshwar mentioned, whatever algorithms we built in, we also ensured that there is a manual intervention looking at the data sets, reviewing at the logic and the output we are getting based on those algorithms. So specifically, when you think about COVID, I think the work we did on demand sensing and on supply chain planning, that took a complete hit. We almost had to redo the assumptions in the model, change some of the decision criteria, play with the weightages of different parameters we were planning before COVID times, because it was almost starting from scratch. You cannot use historic data to predict the demand in these environment. But at the same time, when you talk about condition monitoring or when you talk about predictive maintenance, there you can still replicate the pre-COVID and post-COVID, let's say, assumptions in the way the machine should operate. I think one interesting use case which also emerged during post-COVID times is about remote operations, remote service support. So a lot of times thyssenkrupp would fly in experts from Germany on sites during commissioning of a plant, or if there is a breakdown of components. But even though this is not high quality AI, there was a big requirement during COVID circuit breaker to provide these services remotely, to do remote, let's say, visual video communication, using chatbots, using Microsoft Teams, to effectively work with the operator in remote commissioning of the plant and providing augmented, let's say, reality-based training support for our operators to continue the machine running. So that was also an interesting use case, which specifically spiked because of COVID.
Okay, that's interesting. And I'd like to, again, ask anyone who has any other questions, please do use the Q&A. We have around 5 minutes for the discussion to proceed. And there's one topic that Sutowo has actually talked about, which in terms of AI ethics. And I'd like to dig a bit deeper since Sutowo is from the healthcare industry and everybody is worried about ethics. So Sutowo, do you see a need for AI ethics and behavioral scientists to be part of the AI algorithm design team right at the beginning?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, there are guidelines being drawn up on the use of AI, especially when it comes to healthcare. But of course, it's not specific to healthcare. A lot of other industries are also looking at the use of ethical use of AI. In healthcare, we're also drawing up guidelines. So it's important to have proper guidelines in place. I think that is the basic hygiene that everyone must have, so that then we know what are the rules of the game. So that's first thing. And then we also need to look at how then we want to regulate the use of AI algorithm as well, because currently the current thinking that we have is that we are looking at it similar to how we are looking at medical devices. So for commercial AI algorithm that are used in healthcare, we see it no differently from the medical devices, which is why then you have to go through the whole process of seeking approval from the regulators, which is our Health Sciences Authority. So I think these are the basic building blocks that we need to put in place. The third thing is that in healthcare, our concept, which Bireshwar actually talked about earlier, is that we use AI, or we look at AI as a decision support, meaning we will not use it independent of human judgment. It is used to help speed up the process. It is used to help us identify, actually, even some of the biases that you mentioned earlier. Sometimes given the right data input, AI actually will probably have less bias than a human. So it also helps as a decision support tool where additional input is given to the human decision maker. So I think that's important. And in the process of also building the AI models, it's important to not look at it purely from a tech perspective, because it is a combination of inputs and people working together, at least in healthcare, across 3 different areas. Of course, we need tech people, we need the clinicians, and we need the administrators as well, because often we are not just talking about the clinical aspect, we are also talking about work processes and workflows, which is why it's important every time we talk about AI in healthcare, we need the 3 different groups of people to come together. Thank you,
Sutowo. And I'd like to go to Bireshwar. Talked about the human, Sutowo was talking about the human aspect, which I think is really important. A conversation that I had with another bank where they have actually introduced AI and freed up the team to do other tasks, but their middle boss is not allowing the team to go elsewhere. So this is a people problem. It's not a algorithm or a tech problem. So my question to you, Bireshwar, is when you actually do deal with this algorithm and you actually input these algorithms inside the departments, do we have a top-down and bottom-up training for the middle managers, because they also get affected in the way how they supervise things and the manpower under them?
No, Winston, that's absolutely, it's an excellent point, right? So I think what are some of the things that impede scale deployment of AI? Of course, you have all the challenges that you face around legacy systems and around the data quality and all, but the cultural aspect is a massive one. And again, what we've noticed is an AI is a continuum. Wherever you're doing certain stuff, which is simplifying things, making things a little bit more easier for everybody, those things get embraced a lot. Wherever you start, again, you're helping people save time, and trust me, everybody likes to save time. But then when you get to the other end, where decision-making starts getting questioned, challenged, because essentially for getting an AI score, it's still getting rejected, your judgment you get into those kind of debates, that's where we've seen a lot of challenges. So I think a vital aspect of that, and we've seen a lot of financial institutions invest in that, is also the whole data and digital, I wouldn't call it literacy, but awareness and adoption training that people go through. This is it's an ever-changing world. We do need to evolve with that world, because the clients that we serve, whether you're on an individual level or on a corporate level, you're a human who's exposed to technology. Your expectation of how your service provider, and bank is nothing but a service provider, is interacting with you has to be in line with what the kind of service a Grab or a Deliveroo or a Facebook or an Instagram is giving. So I think the standards and the goalposts have shifted quite a lot. The cultural aspect is important, but people are starting to get that. There is a second lens to this as well. As I said, there is a client element, there's an efficiency element, but there's also especially in the financial services, there's a market reality element as well. Unfortunately, unlike many other segments, financial institutions have not been doing very well. It has been an underperforming sector for the past few years. Returns to shareholders has been fairly anemic, and the outlook wasn't great, and all of that was before COVID. So we've seen our price to earning ratio as an industry drop from 14 times to 11 times over the last 7 to 8 years, while big tech has gone up from 17 to 22. So the other element of this is a lot of this, is no longer optional for us. We have to invest in this. We have to get the investments going. We cannot be, we have to retrain people from doing the manual stuff to more value added stuff and getting those synergies in. So it's a bit of both. There is a cultural sensitivity and a training element, but there's also an existential efficiency play for us.
Okay, thank you. One last question to Abhinav, my favorite, thyssenkrupp. I'm just wondering quickly, how with AI on play, and you see AI playing a bigger role in manufacturing, do you see manufacturers now becoming closer to the end users, not just the customers, but to the end users themselves? And how is that going to shape manufacturers?
That's a great question. I think we're still far away from that. I think the first, if I look from the application of AI right in manufacturing, there are two, let's say, big buckets of opportunity. One is manufacturing plant operations. How do you reduce cost, which is a EBIT impact? And then you have revenue opportunity, which is how do I use for better pricing, customer acquisition, which is a growth opportunity. Unfortunately, given the way manufacturing is organized, most of the value is based on operations. So I think for the next 3 to 5 years, at least in the short to medium term, you will see most of the AI applications still focused on cost reduction, margin improvement, because there is a clear business case, the capex is limited, and you can see the returns. And then you will see some of the manufacturing industries actually going more towards revenue and growth perspective. So I think connecting with the end user, there are some pilots and use cases, but at scale, if you ask me, I think we are still far away from that. Right. So, for example, if I take your question and push the envelope on that, can a cement manufacturer directly connect with, let's say, the house owner who's buying a cement plant and eliminate the whole ecosystem in between and based on their requirements, customize the product? Maybe in small batches, yes. So maybe in automobiles, we're seeing people using that, people using AI plus 3D printing to really have a very personalized product being manufactured for your customers. So that could be an application for niche sectors, for small applications, but at scale in manufacturing, maybe not yet.
Okay. And we have come to our end of our panel discussion. First of all, really thank you, everyone, just joining us for this. And I hope everyone learned as much as I did from our 3 experts online. So Bireshwar, Sutowo, and Abhinav, thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank
you very much, Winston. And
now I would like to say that we would not have made this virtual summit happen without the support of our sponsors, Denodo, TIBCO Software, and Snowflake. We have a short survey. We promise to make it really short. So please do fill it up. We want to hear from you how we did and what are the ways which we can serve you better. Please do look out for our CDO Hong Kong Summit on October 22nd. You can either register online or can contact our guesting managers. Other than that, thank you and have a great evening. Bye.